The scream tore through the August darkness like a blade dragged across Nayati's soul, jolting him from the half-aware state he maintained while traveling alone through unfamiliar territory. He had been guiding his paint gelding along the ridge road above Buzzard's Roost, contemplating whether to camp under the stars or risk the town's questionable hospitality, when the woman's cry split the night raw, desperate, unmistakably a plea for help that would not be answered by anyone who valued their safety in this lawless corner of Colorado territory. For a heartbeat, Nayati's hands tightened on the reins, his body going rigid with a memory 6 months old. But sharp as broken glass, Dakota's body laid out on the prairie grass skin, torn and bloodied from being dragged behind a horse until he died, turquoise medicine pouch still tied around his neck, like a mockery of protection. His cousin had screamed too. Nayati had been told by the Cheyenne trader who found the remains. Dakota had screamed for help, while white ranchers laughed and placed bets on how long he would last. No one had come. No one had cared enough to intervene when it mattered, when a life could still be saved. The woman screamed again, and Nayati's paralysis shattered. He drove his heels into the paint's flanks, sending the horse plunging down the steep embankment toward the cluster of buildings below. Moonlight illuminated the warped slats of a hay barn at the settlement's eastern edge, lamplight flickering through gaps in the weathered wood. His mind cataloged details with the clarity born of years' tracking game and surviving ambushes, 4 horses tethered outside saddles, still on men who expected to leave quickly. No guards posted, they felt safe, untouchable. The door barred from inside with a timber slotted through iron brackets. Nayati dismounted at a run, his moccasins silent on the packed earth. His shoulder hit the barn door with the full force of his weight and momentum, the timbers splintering with a crack like thunder. The door exploded, inward hinges shrieking, and he stumbled through the gap into a scene that confirmed every dark suspicion he harbored about this territory and the men who claimed to bring civilization to it. 4 ranch hands had pinned a woman against straw bales stacked along the western wall, their rough hands tearing at the collar of her travel-worn blouse until the fabric hung in shreds from her shoulders, exposing the pale skin beneath. She fought them with the desperate strength of the cornered, her dark hair fallen loose from its pins and sticking to the sweat and tears on her face. One attacker, a thick-necked brute with scars raking his forearm like claw marks, pressed a hunting knife against her ribs, the steel catching lantern light as he grinned with tobacco-stained teeth. "Quiet now, English." The scarred man growled, his breath visible in the cool night air despite the summer heat. "Marshal Kane says you got debts to settle. We're just collecting interest before you get shipped east to the cribs." The woman twisted in their grip, her blue eyes blazing with fury and terror in equal measure. "You're lying. I paid everything through Western Union before I left London. I have the receipt. It's in my bag at the depot." "Receipt says different now." Another man sneered, dangling a crumpled telegraph paper just beyond her reach. The ink glistened wetly where someone had altered the figures fresh enough that Nayati could smell it from across the barn. "Let her go," Nayati said quietly, his voice cutting through their laughter like a knife through silk. "Now." The 4 men froze their hands, still gripping the woman's arms and shoulders. Slowly, deliberately, they turned to face him. The scarred one, Bear Claw Nayati would learn later, named for the marks on his arm, spat into the straw at his feet, his eyes raking over Nayati's buckskin leggings, beadwork shirt, and the 2 braids wrapped with strips of red cloth. "You got no business here, Indian. This is town matter, white folks' business. You understand those words, or you want me to speak slower?" Nayati's gaze flicked to the woman. Her eyes met his across the scattered straw and broken tack, and in that instant something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, that they were both outsiders in a world designed to devour anyone who did not fit its narrow definitions. Her lips formed a single word, silent but desperate. "Please." "Last chance," Nayati said to Bear Claw, his right hand drifting toward the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. Let her go, or I make you let her go. Your choice how much it hurts. Bear Claw's face twisted with contempt and rage. Boys, looks like this man needs a lesson in manners. He lunged forward with the knife, a wild upward slash aimed at Nayati's gut. But Nayati had been fighting since he was old enough to ride, trained in the warrior traditions of his people, and hardened by the brutal reality of survival in a land that offered mercy to no one. He sidestepped the blade with fluid grace, caught Bear Claw's wrist in both hands, and twisted hard. Bone cracked with a sound like green wood breaking. The knife clattered to the floor, and Bear Claw's howl of pain was cut short when Nayati's elbow connected with his temple, dropping him like a felled tree. The other three came at him together, emboldened by numbers and whiskey courage. Nayati grabbed a coiled bullwhip hanging from a post and cracked it across one man's face, opening a gash from brow to jaw that sent blood streaming into his eyes. He used the momentum to pivot, driving his boot into another's knee with surgical precision. The joint buckled with a sickening crunch, and the man went down screaming, clutching his shattered leg. The third swung a rusted shovel with the desperate strength of someone who had just realized he might die tonight. Nayati ducked beneath the arc, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle his hair, and delivered a short, brutal punch to the solar plexus that folded the man in half and left him retching in the dirt. Through it all, the violence, the dust, the animal sounds of men in pain. The woman pressed herself against the wall chest, heaving eyes wide but tracking every movement with the sharp intelligence of someone who understood she was witnessing something rare and dangerous. A man who could match violence with greater violence, who could turn the predators into prey. When Nayati positioned himself between her and the groaning men on the floor, she felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the suffocating fear that had gripped her since the moment Marshal Kane's men had revealed the truth of her situation. This stranger, this Lakota warrior, who had burst through a barred door at the sound of her screams, had just risked his life for her, a woman he did not know, whose name he had not asked, whose gratitude he did not seem to expect. The fight ended as suddenly as it began. Bear Claw lay unconscious, blood streaming from where his head had struck the barn post. Two others writhed in agony, injuries severe enough to require a doctor's attention. The fourth had fled into the night, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Nayati turned to face her fully, his breathing elevated, but controlled a shallow cut, bleeding through his shirt at the left shoulder, where the knife had grazed him during the initial exchange. His dark eyes swept over her torn clothing, the rope burns on her wrists where they had bound her earlier, the bruise darkening on her cheekbone. His expression remained carefully neutral, giving away nothing of what he thought or felt. "You're bleeding," she whispered, nodding at his shoulder. Her voice carried the crisp consonants and rounded vowels of educated London speech, oddly incongruous in this rough frontier barn. "It's shallow. I'll live." The words came out rougher than he intended, edged with something he could not name, anger at the men who had hurt her perhaps, or the deeper fury at a world that seemed designed to break anyone who lacked power or protection. "Can you stand?" She nodded and pushed away from the wall on trembling legs. He stepped forward slowly and deliberately, non-threatening, and extended his hand. She stared at it for a moment, brown skin, calloused palm scars across the knuckles that spoke of a lifetime of hard use, then reached out and placed her smaller, paler hand in his. His grip was warm, steady, surprisingly gentle for someone who had just dispatched 4 men with brutal efficiency. He helped her to her feet, and when she swayed slightly, he steadied her with his free hand at her elbow. They stood that way for several heartbeats, close enough that she could smell leather and horse sweat and something clean beneath it, like sage and wood smoke. His face, all sharp planes and steady dark eyes, remained utterly calm, as if breaking down barn doors and fighting 4 men at once was merely another evening's work. "Thank you." She managed her voice, breaking on the second word. I thought they were going to... I know. He released her hand, but kept his body angled protectively between her and the groaning men. We need to leave before the one who ran brings reinforcements. What's your name? Eliza Hartwell. Nayati. He offered no surname, no tribal affiliation, nothing beyond the single name. Stay close to me, Miss Hartwell. Outside, boots crunched on gravel, and voices called out in the darkness, rough and angry. The law was coming, such as it was, in Buzzard's Roost. Nayati heard at least 6 men, maybe more, spreading out to surround the barn. He recognized the cadence of authority in one voice, a white man accustomed to being obeyed, speaking with the casual arrogance of someone who believed his badge made him untouchable. Before he could formulate a plan, the barn door swung fully open, and a tall man in his early 40s stepped through a silver badge pinned to his vest, catching the lamplight. His features were arranged in an expression of practiced concern that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. Behind him, 2 deputies wielded Spencer, repeating rifles barrels leveled at Nayati's chest. Evening. Marshal Frederick Kane said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of an educated Easterner who had gone west to carve out an empire through means best left unexamined. You breaking doors for sport, son, that's destruction of property. Serious offense in these parts. Nayati did not move, did not shift his weight, or give any indication of his intentions. She leaves with me. Kane's smile widened fractionally, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect for a frontier lawman. Now that's a problem. You see, Miss Hartwell here is what we call a town ward under my protection until certain financial matters get sorted out. She's got debts to settle, obligations to fulfill. I don't owe anything, Eliza said, stepping out from behind Nayati before he could stop her. Her voice shook, but held steady, fueled by righteous anger. My receipt from Western Union shows I paid $37.50 for my passage. Everything was arranged before I left London. Your receipt? Kane interrupted smoothly, producing a folded telegraph paper from his vest pocket with the flourish of a stage magician. Shows a balance of $375 for passage, lodging, and associated expenses. Right here, stamped by Western Union, witnessed by Mr. Franklin's clerk. All legal and proper. He held the paper up to the lamplight, and even from across the barn, Eliza could see the alterations, numbers added with fresher ink figures, changed her supposed signature forged in handwriting that looked nothing like her own careful script. That's not my mark, she whispered. The numbers are wrong. Someone changed them. Careful with accusations like that, ma'am. Kane said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Fraud is a serious charge. Now I'm a reasonable man. I understand you're confused, maybe scared after whatever happened here tonight. But the facts are the facts. You owe money and you'll work it off proper like or face the consequences. From somewhere near the barn entrance, a new voice spoke, quiet, precise, carrying the hint of schoolroom discipline and barely suppressed fury. It's Fat Frank's clerk's handwriting. I've seen it on saloon tabs and supply invoices for the past 2 years. A woman stepped into the lamplight, her severe gray dress and hair pinned in a tight bun, marking her as one of the few genuinely respectable women in Buzzard's Roost. Nora Fitch was 30 years old, and she had been teaching immigrant children to read and write in a drafty church shed since her arrival 3 years earlier. She carried a cloth satchel over one shoulder, and the kind of moral certainty that made corrupt men uncomfortable in her presence. Kane's expression hardened. Miss Fitch, this doesn't concern you. It concerns me when fraud is committed against a woman who has no one to speak for her, Nora said crisply. She moved to stand beside Nayati and Eliza. I've sent enough telegraphs through that office to recognize the clerk's handwriting. That signature is forged, Marshal. Those numbers have been altered with fresh ink. This woman owes nothing, and you know it. For a moment, Kane's mask slipped entirely, revealing something cold and reptilian beneath. Then he shrugged as if the matter were of little consequence. You make serious accusations, Miss Fitch. Perhaps we should discuss them with Judge Harrow over in Four Corners when he makes his circuit next month. In the meantime, Miss Hartwell remains in protective custody. He gestured to his deputies, who raised their rifles. As for you, son, Kane said to Nayati, his tone conversational, you've got two choices. Stand down peaceful and leave town by sunrise, or I arrest you for assault, breaking and entering, and interfering with a lawful marshal's duties. Your pick. Nayati's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his revolver. But Eliza's hand touched his forearm, a light pressure through the buckskin sleeve. When he glanced at her, she gave the smallest shake of her head. Not like this. Not yet. He exhaled slowly and lifted his hand away from the cold palm, out in a gesture of temporary surrender. I'll leave, Nayati said quietly, then speaking directly to Eliza. But I'll come back for you. That's a promise. Eliza's fingers tightened on his wrist. Promise me, she whispered urgently. Swear it. I swear. Be ready when I come. Kane smiled. That's real touching. Now, Miss Hartwell, you'll come along quiet with my deputies. As Kane's men escorted Eliza out of the barn, Nayati stood motionless, his jaw tight. When the sound of hoofbeats faded and only he and Nora remained, he turned to her. Tell me about Kane. Everything you know. Nora's expression grew calculating. He arrived 2 years ago with money and a federal appointment. Within 6 months, he owned the marshal's office. The trafficking started about a year ago. Women like Eliza lured out here with promises and then trapped with fake debts. Some get sold to the mining camps at Quicksilver. Others disappear into the brothels at Crow's Landing. How many? That I know about, maybe 30 in the past year. But Kane's operation is bigger than just trafficking. He's running range war tactics to force small ranchers off water rights, freight monopolies, protection rackets. He owns this town through fear and corruption. Nayati absorbed this. You said there's a man I should meet, Silas Brennan. His lean-to is 5 miles west near Timber Creek. Silas knows things about Kane's operation, where they move the women, how they cover the books. He might help if you're serious about this. Why are you doing this? Nayati asked. You could stay silent, stay safe. Because I'm tired of watching good people destroyed while evil prospers. Nora's voice was fierce. And because you're the first person in months who's tried to help. As dawn broke, Nayati rode west. He had made a promise to a woman with fierce blue eyes, and he would keep that promise or die trying. Silas Brennan's lean-to squatted in a shallow draw where Timber Creek bent north, a structure of rough-cut planks and canvas tarp that barely qualified as shelter. Silas emerged as Nayati approached a man in his mid-40s, weathered by hardship, holding a shotgun that he lowered when Nayati identified himself. Nora sent me. Need to talk about Kane. Silas poured bitter coffee and spoke without preamble. Kane tried to buy me out 6 months ago. My land sits on Timber Fork and he needs the water rights. When I wouldn't sell, they dammed the creek upstream. Lost 30 head to thirst. My 3 kids are living with my sister in Green Valley because I can't feed them proper. All I got left is this land and my name. There must be proof, Nayati said. Evidence of what he's doing. There is. Fat Frank keeps a ledger behind the bar at the Brass Bell, every transaction recorded. But there's another copy. Frank sends monthly reports to the Quicksilver mine office at Coal Dust, 8 miles east. Records of the shipments, women being delivered. If we can get that ledger, we might have enough to take to Judge Harrow. He's honest, but getting to him means surviving Kane's men first. Then we go tonight. Get the ledger from coal dust. Silas studied him. You got a death wish? No. But I made a promise to Miss Hartwell, and Kane's keeping her locked up until he can ship her east. We need that evidence before she disappears forever. They planned through the day. As evening approached, Nayati rode into town, keeping to the shadows. Near the livery stable, he encountered Dr. Henry Whitcomb emerging from the Brass Bell's back entrance. How is she? Nayati asked without preamble. Whitcomb looked up sharply. You're the one from the barn. She's alive. Beat up, scared, but tougher than she looks. They've got her locked upstairs guarded. Kane's planning to move her on the midnight freight through Pine Needle Spur. Once she's on that train, you'll never see her again. Can you get a message to her? I'm treating her this afternoon. What do you want me to say? Tell her I'm keeping my promise. Tell her to be ready. Whitcomb nodded slowly. I'll tell her. But son Kane will kill you if he gets the chance. Then I won't give him the chance. That night, Nayati, Silas, and Nora rode east through the Badlands, a labyrinth of erosion and stone that Nayati navigated by starlight. They reached coal dust before midnight, the mining settlement dark, except for a few flickering lamps. The mine office stood apart, a squat building with a corrugated tin roof. Nayati approached alone, picked the simple padlock with his knife, and slipped inside. By candlelight, he searched through papers and ledgers until he found it. Peacemaker Freight Confidential. The pages detailed transactions that sickened him. Names, ages, prices. Eliza's name appeared near the bottom. E. Hartwell, East Spur, midnight departure September 3rd, $450 to Crow's Landing. He was tearing the page free when glass shattered behind him. Hawkeye, Kane's primary enforcer, had returned early with armed men. Gunfire erupted. Nayati dove through the back window, rolled to his feet, and sprinted for the horses. Silas was already firing his shotgun, providing cover. They fled west through the Badlands as the mine office burst into flames from an overturned lamp, the blaze lighting their desperate flight. They reached Buzzard's Roost at dawn, exhausted but alive. Nayati rode straight to Whitcomb's clinic. This is dynamite, Whitcomb said, examining the torn ledger page. Names, dates, money trails, Kane's fingerprints are all over it. This proves systematic trafficking. Will it hold up in court? If we can get it to Judge Harrow before Kane destroys the evidence and kills everyone who knows about it. Then tonight we get Eliza out, Nayati said. That evening, Nayati approached the Brass Bell through back alleys. He climbed to the upper floor, incapacitated the guard, and picked the lock on Eliza's door. She stood in moonlight chains, binding her wrists to a floor ring, her face bruised, but her eyes blazing with undiminished spirit. Nayati, is it really you? I'm getting you out. He worked the lock and then found the weak point in her chains and snapped them with his knife. Can you walk? I can run if I have to. There are 2 more women, Esperanza and Bianca. End of the hall. They freed the other women quickly. The escape nearly succeeded until Bear Claw appeared at the bottom of the stairs, roaring in rage despite his broken wrist. Nayati dropped him with a throat punch, but the noise brought others. Gunfire erupted in the narrow stairwell. Nayati provided covering fire as the women fled into the alley where Nora waited with a wagon. Eliza hesitated at the wagon gate, turning back. Come with us. Not yet. I'll lead them off, give you time. He met her eyes. Trust me. She grabbed his hand, squeezed hard. Then she climbed into the wagon, and Nora drove away as Nayati mounted his horse and led Kane's men on a desperate chase through moonlit countryside, finally losing them in a maze of gullies. When he reached Silas's lean-to hours later, Eliza stood by the fire. At the sound of his horse relief flooded her face. You came back. I promised. They stood close exhaustion and shared survival, creating a bond neither fully understood yet. But they both knew this was far from over. Dawn broke cold over Timber Creek on September 2nd, 1873. Nayati woke to urgent voices, Nora speaking with a rail-thin man in his 50s, who had just arrived on a lathered horse. Nayati, this is Reginald Voss. He's the Western Union agent at Pine Needle Spur. Reginald pulled an envelope from his coat with trembling hands. I've been tracking telegraph discrepancies for months. Money transfers that don't match receipts. I kept private records. He spread papers on the ground. These are copies showing original amounts versus altered amounts. Eliza's is here $37.50 changed to $375. All in Kane's handwriting. Nayati studied the evidence pieces clicking into place. This isn't just Fat Frank's operation. No, Reginald said quietly. Kane is running everything. The trafficking, the range wars, the freight monopoly, it's all one network. He uses Peacemaker Freight as a legal front to move women. Because he's the marshal, no one questions his shipments. He's building an empire through systematic exploitation. How many women? Eliza asked, her voice tight. At least 30 in the past year that I can document. Maybe more. The full scope crashed over them. This was not just rescuing one woman, this was confronting an entire system of corruption backed by federal authority. There's more, Reginald said. Kane wired Crow's Landing this morning. Hawkeye is bringing 8 heavily armed riders to cut you off at Dagger Point Canyon, the only pass-through to Four Corners. If you ride into that canyon, you'll be trapped. Then we find another way, Silas said. There is no other way, not with wagons. It's Dagger Point or a 3-day detour through mountains, and Kane's men will find you before you make halfway. Nayati studied the mental map forming in his mind. Dagger Point was a natural ambush site, narrow, steep-walled, perfect for trapping travelers. But avoiding it meant exposure across open ground, where Kane's superior numbers would tell. We go through the canyon, he decided. But on our terms. We'll need Judge Harrow to meet us if we can get word to him. I can telegraph Four Corners, Reginald said. Tell him to bring deputies and meet you at the canyon's east entrance by noon today. But you'll have to survive until then. They moved out within the hour, a desperate caravan, heading toward Four Corners. Esperanza and Bianca rode in the wagon with Nora and young Oliver, who had emerged from hiding to help. Silas and Nayati rode, flanking eyes scanning for threats. Eliza insisted on riding rather than hiding in the wagon mounted on Silas's spare mare. As they rode, she spoke quietly to Nayati. Why are you doing this? You could have left after the barn, taken your payment and ridden north. Why stay? Nayati was silent for a moment. I had a cousin, Lakota. He died 6 months ago because men like Kane value power more than people. I promised myself I wouldn't look away again. I'm sorry. My father used to say that a man's character shows in what he does when no one's watching, Eliza said softly. You could have walked away. So could you. You could have stayed quiet, accepted the debt, tried to survive by going along. But you screamed. You fought back. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. They rode in companionable silence, after that the distance between their horses gradually closing until their stirrups nearly touched. It was a small thing, but it marked a shift from two people thrown together by circumstance to two people choosing to stand together. By mid-morning, they approached Dagger Point Canyon as storm clouds gathered. Thunder rumbled in the distance. They're up there, Nayati said, pointing to the rim where fresh scrapes marked recent passage. Hawkeye's men. 6 or 8 rifles waiting for us. We could try the mountain route, Silas suggested. Cain's men will run us down in open country. At least here the rocks give us cover. Nayati turned to Nora. You wait here with the wagon. When I signal 2 shots spaced 5 seconds apart, you drive through fast. Don't stop for anything. And if you don't signal, then find another way to 4 corners and get this evidence to Judge Harrow. He handed her the envelope of receipts and the ledger page. This is bigger than any of us now. Nora took the envelope, her hands steady despite fear. Don't you dare die on me. Eliza climbed down from the wagon. I'm coming with you. No. You need someone to watch your back. Silas has hurt his shoulders barely holding. You need another gun. She picked up a Spencer carbine. I can shoot. My father taught me. I won't miss at close range. Nayati wanted to argue, but he saw the resolve in her eyes. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say. If I tell you to run, you run. Agreed. They moved into the canyon on foot. The walls rose steep and narrow on either side, wind funneling through with stinging force. Thunder boomed overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. They had advanced perhaps 50 yards, when the first shot cracked from the rim rock, the bullet spanging off stone inches from Nayati's head. He dove behind a boulder, pulling Eliza down, as gunfire erupted from 3 positions along the canyon walls. Silas returned fire with his shotgun, the boom echoing like artillery. Can't go forward, can't go back, Silas shouted. We're pinned. Nayati scanned the walls. There, a narrow cleft in the southern wall, perhaps 20 yards ahead. If they could reach it, they could climb out of the kill zone and flank the ambushers. Covering fire, he said to Silas. I'm taking Eliza up that cleft. Give us 30 seconds. Silas nodded. Go! They sprinted as Silas's shotgun roared. They reached the cleft as bullets chewed the ground behind them. The passage was barely wide enough for a person steep and treacherous with loose scree. Nayati climbed with practiced sureness, finding handholds in cracks. Eliza followed, her fingers bloodied where sharp edges bit into flesh. They emerged on a narrow ledge halfway up the canyon wall. Below, Silas was pinned down. Above, Hawkeye's men were repositioning. Can you shoot from here? Nayati asked. She settled the carbine against her shoulder. Tell me when. Nayati spotted one of the ambushers moving along the opposite rim. Now. Eliza fired. The man jerked and fell tumbling down the canyon wall. She worked the lever action, chambering a new round, her face pale but focused. Good shot. They traded fire with the remaining ambushers for agonizing minutes. Rain intensified, making every movement treacherous. Then disaster struck a rifle bullet, caught Silas in his good shoulder. He went down hard and lay curled on the canyon floor as bullets kicked up dirt around him. Cover me! Eliza shouted, and before Nayati could stop her, she was scrambling down the cleft, half sliding, half falling to reach Silas. Nayati fired as fast as he could reload, providing cover as Eliza reached the injured rancher and began dragging him toward shelter. She was strong, but Silas was a big man, and the effort left her exposed for terrible seconds. A bullet tore through her skirt, missing flesh by inches. Another knocked her bonnet off. But she did not stop, just kept pulling until she had Silas behind cover and was tearing strips from her petticoat to bind his wound. Nayati descended in a controlled fall and rejoined them just as Hawkeye himself appeared at the canyon entrance, flanked by 3 more riders. That's far enough, Hawkeye called out. You're trapped. Give up the women and hand over whatever you stole from the mine office, and maybe I let you walk out. The women aren't property, Nayati called back. And what we took proves Cain's a fraud and a slaver. Hawkeye laughed. I'm going to live rich for him. Your choice is die now or die later. The standoff stretched both sides, calculating. Then from behind Hawkeye, new sounds arose, hoofbeats, many of them, and authoritative voices. Dr. Whitcomb appeared on horseback, and behind him came 20 riders wearing county deputy badges, led by a stern-faced man in his 60s with iron-gray hair. "What in blazes is going on here?" Judge Harrow roared. "Hawkeye Barnes, you're supposed to be running cattle, not playing ambush in a public canyon." Hawkeye paled, recognizing catastrophic shift. He raised his hand slowly. "Just a misunderstanding, Your Honor. These folks have evidence of systematic fraud and trafficking." Whitcomb interrupted, handing the envelope to the judge. "And you're going to want to see it before Marshal Kane destroys everything." Judge Harrow scanned the contents, his expression darkening. "Where's Kane now?" "Buzzard's Roost, last I heard." "Then we're going to Buzzard's Roost." The judge turned to his sheriff. "Arrest Hawkeye and his men. Attempted murder conspiracy to traffic. And someone get a doctor for that man before he bleeds out." As deputies secured the ambushers, Nayati helped Eliza to her feet. She was soaked through, shivering from cold and reaction, her hands still stained with Silas's blood. But when she looked at him, her eyes were clear. "We did it. We made it through." "Not yet. Kane's still out there, and he'll fight when he realizes we're coming. Then we finish it." Her jaw set with determination. Together. They rode toward Buzzard's Roost as the storm began to clear. Judge Harrow led the procession with righteous fury, determined to see justice done. As they rode, Eliza and Nayati found themselves side by side again. Neither spoke, but there was comfort in the shared silence, recognition that they had crossed some invisible threshold together. Somewhere ahead lay Kane and the final confrontation that had been building since a warrior heard a scream and chose to answer it. The storm followed them back to Buzzard's Roost, transforming the prairie into treacherous mud. By the time they reached town's outskirts, rain fell in solid sheets. "We can't ride him blind," the sheriff said. "Kane could have men positioned anywhere." "Then we go on foot," Judge Harrow decided. "Sheriff, take 10 men and secure the brass bell. I want Kane alive if possible, but I won't lose good men bringing in a criminal." Nayati dismounted, his wounded shoulder throbbing. Beside him, Eliza slid from her mare and checked the Spencer carbine with steady hands. "You should stay with the wagon," Nayati said. "No. I'm seeing this through to the end. Kane needs to know he didn't win." They advanced through rain-lashed streets. Windows were shuttered, doors barred. The town waited to see which side would prevail. The brass bell loomed ahead. As they approached, the door burst open, and men spilled out, Kane's hired guns, armed with rifles and desperate ferocity. Gunfire erupted. The street became chaos. Nayati dragged Eliza behind a water trough, returning fire. A bullet splintered wood inches from his head. Another tore through the trough, spraying them with water. The fight was brutal and close. Nayati's shoulders screamed with each shot, but he kept firing. Eliza used the carbine with controlled accuracy, her shots disciplined despite chaos. The tide turned when deputies stormed the saloon from the rear, catching Kane's men in crossfire. Within minutes, it was over hired guns surrendering or fleeing. But Kane himself was not among the captured. "He's gone." Fat Frank wheezed, hands bound. "Rode out the back when shooting started. Headed east toward Green Valley Ford. He's got supplies stashed there. He's running." "How long ago?" Judge Harrow demanded. 10 minutes, maybe less." "Sheriff, take 5 men and ride him down." "I'm going with them," Nayati said. "This is county business now." "Kane will fight," Nayati interrupted. He won't surrender to men he doesn't respect. I'll bring him back." Judge Harrow studied him, then nodded. "Go. But Sheriff Jenkins goes with you." As Nayati swung into his saddle, Eliza grabbed his stirrup. "Don't you dare die. I didn't survive all this to lose you now." The words hit him like physical force. He looked down at her, saw raw emotion in her eyes. He reached down his hand, covering hers. "I'll come back. Wait for me. I'll be here." They rode east through the storm, 6 men chasing a desperate criminal through darkness. They reached Green Valley Ford as dawn grayed the eastern sky. The river was in full flood, roaring through its banks. And there on the far bank sat Frederick Kane, soaked and hatless, but still carrying himself with arrogance. "That's far enough," Kane shouted across the water, holding a rifle. "You got no authority to cross county lines." "You're under arrest, Kane," Sheriff Jenkins bellowed. "Trafficking, fraud, attempted murder, conspiracy. Judge Harrow has the evidence." Kane's face twisted with rage. "I built this territory. I brought law where there was none. You think some ink on paper will erase what I've done?" "Not Judge Harrow," Nayati called out. He urged his horse into the swollen river. "And not the people you hurt." Kane raised his rifle, sighting at Nayati. "Should have killed you in that barn when I had the chance." But the shot never came. Eliza Hartwell, who had followed on her mare despite orders to stay behind, emerged from cottonwoods on Kane's side of the river. She had crossed upstream, swimming her horse through the flood, and now approached from Kane's blind side with the Spencer raised. "Drop the rifle, Marshal. You're done." Kane's face went white with shock. For a moment he seemed paralyzed. Then his arrogance reasserted itself, and he swung the rifle toward her. "You don't have the spine to pull that trigger, English." Eliza fired. The bullet struck Kane's rifle, tearing it from his hands and sending it spinning into the river. He cursed and reached for his pistol, but Nayati was already in the water, closing the distance. His horse lunged through the current, and as Kane drew his gun, Nayati launched himself from the saddle in a flying tackle that carried both men into the raging flood. They grappled in the water, swept downstream by the current. Kane was strong, driven by desperation, but Nayati understood water's power. He used the current instead of fighting it, letting it carry them toward a sandbar. They crashed onto the bar in a tangle of limbs, both coughing water. Kane swung a fist that connected with Nayati's wounded shoulder, sending agony through his body. But Nayati responded with a brutal punch to Kane's solar plexus, followed by an elbow to the back of his head, driving him face first into sand. "Stay down. It's over." Kane bucked, trying to throw him off. "I'll see you hang. I'll have you skinned." Sheriff Jenkins arrived and snapped iron cuffs onto Kane's wrists. "Frederick Kane, you're under arrest." They dragged Kane back across the river. On the far bank, Eliza waited. As Nayati climbed from the water, she met him halfway, and before either could think, she wrapped her arms around him in a fierce embrace. He stiffened for a heartbeat, then relaxed, and held her in return, feeling her heart beat against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. You saved my life back there. Then let's call it even." As they rode back toward Buzzard's Roost, with Kane secured and sunrise breaking, Nayati allowed himself to hope that maybe the worst was behind them. But he knew the fight was not finished yet. Judge Harrow wasted no time. Within hours of Kane's capture, he established a temporary court in Buzzard's Roost's church on the largest building in town. Every citizen who could walk crowded inside. But before the hearing could begin, Reginald Voss approached Nayati and Eliza with urgent news. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "I was going through Kane's telegraph records messages he sent and received over the past year. I found this." He handed Nayati a copy of a wire dated 6 months earlier. Nayati read it, his hands beginning to shake. 2F. Cane buzzards roost from Quicksilver Mine. Your Lakota problem solved. Dakota makes example. Cattle drive cover, holds. No witnesses. Payment transferred. Hawkeye. The world seemed to tilt beneath Nayati's feet. Kane ordered Dakota's death. Not just ordered it, paid for it, Reginald said. Dakota was working as a guide for a freight company that competed with Kane's Peacemaker freight operation. Your cousin discovered evidence of Kane's trafficking network, saw women being moved in freight wagons, heard things he shouldn't have. Kane couldn't risk exposure, so he arranged the rigged cattle drive as cover for murder. Made it look like Dakota died in a ranching accident. Eliza touched Nayati's arm gently. I'm so sorry. Nayati stared at the telegram, emotions crashing through him, rage, grief, a terrible sense of vindication mixed with renewed pain. His hands had shaken during storms because some part of him had always known there was more to Dakota's death than random cruelty. Now he had proof. Kane had not just built an empire on suffering, he had personally ordered the death of Nayati's cousin to protect that empire. This changes things, Judge Harrow said quietly, having overheard. This is premeditated murder, not just trafficking and fraud. With this evidence, Kane will hang. The preliminary hearing proceeded with grim efficiency. Judge Harrow read the charges slowly and clearly: trafficking, fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and now murder in the first degree. For ordering Dakota's death, Kane stood in shackles, his expensive suit rumpled, his face unshaven. When the judge finished, he looked at Kane directly. How do you plead? Kane's lawyer leaned in to whisper, but Kane shook his head. Not guilty. I demand trial by jury. Your associates are cooperating with the investigation in exchange for reduced sentences, Judge Harrow said calmly. Hawkeye Barnes has confessed to his role in the trafficking network and to murdering Dakota at your direction. Fat Frank has provided full accounting of the money laundering. Even your telegraph clerk has turned over his records. You have no associates left, Mr. Kane. Only fellow defendants. Color drained from Kane's face as isolation sank in. Trial is set for 2 weeks from today at the county courthouse in Four Corners. Bail is denied. This hearing is adjourned. As deputies led Kane away, the courtroom erupted in cheers. For many in Buzzard's Roost, the idea that a man with Kane's power could actually face consequences was almost incomprehensible. Outside, Nayati stood alone for a moment, staring at the telegram in his hands. Eliza approached quietly and stood beside him. Are you all right? I don't know. I wanted answers about Dakota's death. Now I have them, but they don't make the grief less. They just make the anger more focused. Focused anger can drive us, Eliza said softly. Or it can consume us. Choose carefully. He looked at her, this woman who had survived her own trauma and emerged not broken, but stronger. What will you do now? Your debts are cleared. You're free to return to London if you want. Is that what you want, for me to leave? I want you to be happy, safe, to have the life you came here looking for. She smiled faintly. I came here looking for something safe and predictable. Instead, I found something I didn't know I needed. What's that? Freedom. Real freedom. Not just from Kane, but from everything. The expectations, the limitations, the future already written out. She looked at him steadily. I get to decide now. We get to decide. Before he could respond, Nora approached with a small leather-bound notebook. Nayati, there's one more thing. I went through Dr. Whitcomb's records. He kept meticulous notes on every injury he treated that might be connected to Kane's operation. Dates, names, circumstances. It's damning evidence. But I also found this. She handed him a letter, yellowed with age, addressed to Eliza Hartwell, care of Buzzard's Roost Post Office. The seal had been broken. Kane intercepted this at the post office 6 months ago. Nora explained. It's from a London solicitor's firm. Eliza opened it with trembling hands and read aloud. Dear Miss Hartwell, I regret to inform you that Mr. Thomas Thornton, to whom you were betrothed via correspondence, passed away from fever while en route to Colorado Territory last spring. However, before his death, he executed a witnessed will and property deed, granting you his homestead claim near Wildflower Creek, as outlined in your original marriage agreement. The property consists of 160 acres, with water access timber rights and a small cabin. The deed is enclosed, properly filed with the Territorial Land Office. The property is yours without encumbrance. Eliza looked up, eyes wide with shock. There was a real homestead. Thomas Thornton was real. Kane intercepted this so he could keep me trapped with false debts. The deed is legitimate, Nora confirmed. I verified it with the county recorder this morning. You own that land free and clear. Eliza stared at the document as if it might vanish. I own land. Real land. Yours, Nayati confirmed quietly. She turned to him, expression serious. I don't know anything about homesteading. I've never worked land, never built anything. She paused. I can't do this alone. You won't have to. Silas knows farming. Nora can connect you with families. There are people who will help. I want you. The words came out flat, declarative. I want you to help me. Not as hired labor, not as a guide, as a partner. Someone who has a stake in making it work. Nayati was quiet, weighing complications. A white woman and a Lakota man working land together would draw hostility. They would face prejudice from both communities, legal barriers, social ostracism. But he thought of her standing in Dagger Point Canyon carbine, raised and unflinching. He thought of her dragging Silas to safety under fire. He thought of the way she looked at him, not with pity or fear, but with recognition. Wildflower Creek, he said finally. I know the area. Good water, year-round shelter from winter winds. The cabin will need work. The land's never been cultivated, so we'd have to break sod pull stumps. It would be brutal work. Years before it turned real profit. That's not a no. No. It's not a no. Then say yes. He studied her, this woman who had crossed an ocean seeking a new life, and had nearly been destroyed for her courage, who had fought beside him and trusted him when trust should have been impossible. Yes, he said quietly. I'll help you build it. Her face lit with a smile that transformed her. She extended her hand, formal and businesslike, but when he took it, her grip was warm and firm. 2 weeks later, Frederick Kane stood trial in Four Corners. The proceedings lasted 5 days. Witness after witness testified to his crimes. The jury deliberated less than an hour before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Harrow sentenced Kane to hang for the murder of Dakota and to 20 years for each count of trafficking sentences to run consecutively. You betrayed the trust placed in you, the judge said coldly. You used the law as a weapon to victimize the vulnerable. Justice demands your life. Kane's execution was set for 30 days hence. His properties were seized and sold, proceeds distributed among his victims. Hawkeye Barnes received 15 years. Fat Frank got 10 years. The various accomplices received sentences ranging from 1 to 7 years. In the aftermath, justice rippled through the territory. Judge Harrow ordered the immediate removal of the barbed wire dam on Timber Fork, restoring water to Silas and other ranchers. A county surveyor formalized water rights agreements. Esperanza and Bianca chose to remain in the territory, accepting positions with families in Green Valley. Oliver received a commendation and a position as the judge's official courier. Dr. Whitcomb's clinic received public funding. Nora finally got her schoolhouse built with lumber from Kane's seized assets. She named it the Lakota School in honor of the man whose death had sparked the investigation that brought down an empire. Reginald Voss implemented new telegraph protocols to prevent fraud. And Eliza Hartwell rode out to Wildflower Creek with Nayati to see the land that was now hers. The property was as beautiful as he remembered rolling prairie transitioning to wooded hills, a clear creek cutting through, and a small cabin nestled in cottonwoods. The cabin needed work. The roof leaked, the door hung crooked. But the structure was sound, the well was clean, and the soil was rich. "You could grow anything here," Silas said, testing the earth. "Wheat, corn, vegetables. In 5 years with hard work, you'd have a working homestead worth real money." Eliza stood in the doorway, looking out over her land, and Nayati saw her shoulders straighten with determination. "Then we start now." They spent the next 2 weeks establishing basics, repairing the roof, rechinking walls, clearing a garden plot. Nayati taught Eliza to identify edible plants and game trails. She taught him English ballads and how to make proper tea. They worked from dawn to dusk, falling into bed each night, exhausted but satisfied, sleeping on opposite sides of the cabin with a blanket strung between them for propriety. Nora visited weekly with supplies. Silas sent tools and advice. Slowly, the homestead took shape. The garden was planted. Chickens arrived. A young milk cow was purchased with restitution money. One evening, as autumn painted the hills gold and crimson, Eliza and Nayati sat on the cabin steps, watching sunset. "I never imagined this," she said quietly. "When I left London, I thought I was going to marry a stranger and live a quiet life. Instead, I found something I didn't know I was looking for. What's that? Freedom and partnership with someone who sees me as an equal. What happens when people start talking when they say it's improper? Let them talk. The land doesn't care about their opinions, and neither do I." He paused. "But if it gets too difficult, if it affects your reputation, I can move on. You own the land. You don't need. Stop." She placed her hand over his. "I do need you. Not just for the work. I need you because I choose to. And if the world has a problem with that, the world can go to blazes." He laughed at her vehemence, and she joined him. As stars emerged overhead, Nayati allowed himself to believe that maybe the future held something better than mere survival. Maybe it held belonging purpose, and the quiet contentment of building a life with someone who saw him not as an outsider, but as an equal and partner. 3 weeks later on the morning, Frederick Kane was scheduled to hang Nayati, stood at Lakota's grave on the prairie, the turquoise medicine pouch in his hands. He had recovered it from the county evidence room where it had been held since his cousin's death. "I kept my promise," he said quietly to the wind and grass. Justice came. It was slow and it cost blood and pain, but it came. I hope you're at peace now. He buried the medicine pouch at the head of the grave, marking it with stones in the traditional way. Then he turned and rode back toward the Wildflower Creek, toward Eliza and the life they were building together. At the homestead, she waited on the porch, and when she saw him approaching, she smiled the open, genuine smile of someone who had found home, not in a place, but in partnership. That evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Nayati found Eliza standing in the cabin doorway, looking out over their land. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "Yes." But he was not looking at the snow. He was looking at her. She caught his gaze and smiled, then reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his with easy familiarity. Together, they watched the snow transform their land into something pristine and new. Behind them, the fire crackled. The chickens roosted. The cow chewed contentedly. Everything they had built together. The Lakota warrior who had heard a scream and broken down a barn door had saved more than one woman's life that night. He had set in motion a chain of events that brought justice to the corrupt, freedom to the enslaved, and hope to those who had thought hope was lost. And the Englishwoman who had screamed for help in that barn had found not just rescue, but purpose, strength, and a home built with her own hands alongside a man who saw her as an equal. As snow continued to fall and fire burned warm inside, they stood together, watching the sun set on their first winter at Wildflower Creek, knowing that whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. Two people from different worlds, bound by shared survival and mutual respect, building something good from the ashes of evil. A partnership forged in fire, tempered by trust and sustained by the simple truth that sometimes the greatest courage is choosing to stand together when the world says you should stand apart. The frontier was harsh, unforgiving, and offered no guarantees. But in this moment, in this place, they had carved out something precious, a life of their own. Choosing earned through blood and determination, and sustained by the quiet certainty that they belonged together.